Hello, ninth grade. Today we're in your Themes in Literature book. We are starting at the end of the story on page 68 so we can meet our author, and then we'll go back to the beginning. Alexandre Dumas. He was born 1802 and died in 1870. He was a French author and a playwright. Having worked for the later King Louis Philippe as a scribe, Dumas began writing his own works. He first found success as a playwright, but later installed himself as part of the forefront of the Romantic movement by writing such classic novels as The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. Dumas has become known as one of the most widely read French authors, and many of his works have been translated into 100 languages over the centuries. Now let's flip back to page 62. I'm going to read an intro. This is not in your book, so just listen. Let me apologize in advance for the way I butchered the main character's name. I was rushing. It is pronounced D'Artagnan. 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 During the time of King Louis XIII and the notorious Cardinal Richelieu, much political intrigue existed between the two men. D'Artagnan, whose simple desire is to join the king's guard, stumbles into conflict on his visit to Paris. How will he react when forced to decide which side he will support? The King's Musketeers and the Cardinal's Guards, adapted from The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. The young D'Artagnan is on a journey to Paris to follow in his father's footsteps and become a musketeer. However, shortly after arriving to Paris, D'Artagnan manages to insult and anger all of the famed Three Musketeers. The young, hot-blooded D'Artagnan meets them for a duel, but instead he finds himself in an unexpected situation. The characters. D'Artagnan. He's the main character, brave, noble, intelligent, and an excellent swordsman. He goes to Paris with a desire to become a musketeer. Athos, remember his name. He's the leader of the musketeers, intelligent, courageous, and a precise swordsman. Porthos. He's one of the Three Musketeers, humorous, vain, and a cheerful but valiant swordsman and fighter. Aramis. He's one of the Three Musketeers, young, romantic, and dramatic swordsman. Monsieur de Treville. He's the captain of the Musketeers and treats the Musketeers as his sons. Forgive me for the pronunciations that I'm about to do, but Jussac, Cossack, and Baccarat, I think those are the Cardinal's Guards. Here we go. D'Artagnan was acquainted with nobody in Paris. He went therefore to his appointment to be with Athos without a second, determined to be satisfied with those his adversary should choose. Besides, his intention was formed to make the brave musketeer all suitable apologies, but without meanness or weakness, fearing that might result from this duel, which generally results from an affair of this kind. When a young and vigorous man fights with an adversary who is wounded and weakened, if conquered, he doubles the triumph of his antagonist. If a conqueror, he is accused of foul play and want of courage. Now we must have badly painted the character of our adventure seeker, or our readers must have already perceived that D'Artagnan was not an ordinary man. Therefore, while repeating to himself that his death was inevitable, he did not make up his mind to die quietly, as one less courageous and less restrained might have done in his place. Page 63. Notice the definitions for irony at the top. These are words you need to know. Irony is the use of words to convey the opposite of their literal meaning, the difference between what a character or speaker says and what the author intends. Dramatic irony is contrasting what a character says and what a reader or audience knows to be true. So the character is saying one thing, but as the readers, the narrators have already told us more information or different information. Situational irony is the difference between what is expected to happen and what actually happens. And then verbal irony is saying the opposite of what is meant. Let's continue. He reflected upon the different characters of those with whom he was going to fight and began to view his situation more clearly. He hoped by means of loyal excuses to make a friend of Athos, whose lordly air and austere bearing pleased him much. He flattered himself he should be able to frighten Porthos with the adventure of the baldric, which he might, if not killed upon the spot, relate to everybody a recital which, well managed, would cover Porthos with ridicule. As to the astute Aramis, he did not entertain much dread of him, and supposing he should be able to get so far, he determined to dispatch him in good style, or at least by hitting him in the face, as Caesar recommended his soldiers do to those of Pompey, to damage forever the beauty of which he was so proud. In addition to this, D'Artagnan possessed that invincible stock of resolution which the counsels of his father had implanted in his heart. Endure nothing from anyone but the king, the cardinal, and Monsieur de Treville. He flew then, rather than walked, toward the convent of the Carmes Duchesses, or rather Deschaux, as it was called at that period, a sort of building without a window, surrounded by barren fields, which was generally employed as the place for reconquest of men who had no time to lose. When D'Artagnan arrived in the sight of the bare spot of ground which extended along the foot of the monastery, Athos had been waiting about 5 minutes, and 12 o'clock was striking. He was then as punctual as the Samaritan woman, and the most rigorous casuist with regard to duels could have nothing to say. Athos, who still suffered grievously from his wound, though it had been dressed anew by Monsieur de Treville's surgeon, was seated on a post and waiting for his adversary with hat in hand, his feather even touching the ground. "Monsieur," said Athos, "I have engaged 2 of my friends as seconds, but these 2 friends are not yet come, at which I am astonished, as it is not at all their custom." "I have no seconds on my part, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, "for having only arrived yesterday in Paris, I as yet know no one but Monsieur de Treville, to whom I was recommended by my father, who has the honor to be, in some degree, one of his friends." Athos reflected for an instant. "You know no one but Monsieur de Treville?" he asked. "Yes, monsieur, I know only him." "Well, but then," continued Athos, speaking half to himself, "if I kill you, I shall have the air of a boy-slayer." "Not too much so," replied D'Artagnan, with a bow that was not deficient in dignity. "Not too much so, since you do me the honor to draw a sword with me while suffering from a wound which is very inconvenient. Very inconvenient, upon my word. And you hurt me devilishly, I can tell you. But I will take the left hand. It is my custom in such circumstances. Do not fancy that I do you a favor. I use either hand easily, and it will be even a disadvantage to you. A left-handed man is very troublesome to people who are not prepared for it. I regret I did not inform you sooner of this circumstance." "You have truly, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, bowing again, "a courtesy for which, I assure you, I am very grateful." "You confuse me," replied Athos, with his gentlemanly air. "Let us talk of something else, if you please." "If you would permit me," said D'Artagnan, with timidity. "What, monsieur?" Page 64. "I have a miraculous balsam for wounds, a balsam given to me by my mother, and of which I have made a trial upon myself." "Well?" "Well, I am sure that in less than 3 days this balsam would cure you. And at the end of 3 days, when you would be cured, well, sir, it would still do me a great honor to be your man." D'Artagnan spoke these words with a simplicity that did honor to his courtesy, without throwing the least doubt upon his courage. "Pardieu, monsieur," said Athos, "that's a proposition that pleases me. Not that I can accept it, but a league off it savors of the gentleman." Thus spoke and acted the gallant knights of the time of Charlemagne, in whom every cavalier ought to seek his model. Unfortunately, we do not live in the times of the great emperor, we live in the times of the cardinal. And 3 days hence, however well the secret might be guarded, it would be known, I say, that we were to fight, and our combat would be prevented. I think these fellows will never come." "If you are in haste, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, with the same simplicity with which a moment before he had proposed to him to put off the duel for 3 days, "if you are in haste, and if it be your will to dispatch me at once, do not inconvenience yourself, I pray you." "There is another word which pleases me," cried Athos, with a gracious nod to D'Artagnan. "That did not come from a man without brains, and certainly not from a man without a heart. Monsieur, I love men of your kidney, and I foresee plainly that if we don't kill each other, I shall hereafter have much pleasure in your conversation. We will wait for these gentlemen, so please you. I have plenty of time, and it will be more correct. Ah, here is one of them, I believe." In fact, at the end of the Rue Vaugirard, the gigantic Porthos appeared. "What?" cried D'Artagnan. "Is your first witness Monsieur Porthos?" "Yes. That disturbs you?" "By no means." "And here is the second." D'Artagnan turned in the direction pointed to by Athos and perceived Aramis. "What?" cried he, in an accent of greater astonishment than before. Your second witness is Monsieur Aramis? Doubtless. Are you not aware that we are never seen one without the others, and that we are called among the Musketeers and the guards at the court in the city, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, or the three inseparables? And yet, as you come from Dax or from Tarbes, said D'Artagnan. It is probable you are ignorant of this little fact, said Athos. My faith, replied D'Artagnan. You are well named, gentlemen, and my adventure, if it should make any noise, will prove at least that your union is not founded upon contrasts. In the meantime, Porthos had come up, waved his hand to Athos, and then turning toward D'Artagnan, stood quite astonished. Let us say in passing that he had changed his baldric and relinquished his cloak. Ah, said he, what does this mean? This is the gentleman I am going to fight with, said Athos, pointing to D'Artagnan with his hand and saluting him with the same gesture. Why, it is with him I am also going to fight, said Porthos. But not before 1 o'clock, replied D'Artagnan. And I also am to fight with this gentleman, said Aramis, coming in his turn onto the place. But not till 2 o'clock, said D'Artagnan with the same calmness. But what are you going to fight about, Athos? Asked Aramis. Faith, I don't very well know. He hurt my shoulder. And you, Porthos? Faith, I am going to fight because I am going to fight, answered Porthos, reddening. Athos, whose keen eye lost nothing, perceived a faintly sly smile pass over the lips of the young Gascon as he replied, We had a short discussion upon dress. And you, Aramis? Asked Athos. Oh, ours is a theological quarrel, replied Aramis, making a sign to D'Artagnan to keep secret the cause of their duel. Page 65. Athos indeed saw a second smile on the lips of D'Artagnan. Indeed, said Athos. Yes, a passage of St. Augustine, upon which we could not agree, said the Gascon. Decidedly, this is a clever fellow, murmured Athos. And now you are assembled, gentlemen, said D'Artagnan. Permit me to offer you my apologies. At this word apologies, a cloud passed over the brow of Athos. A haughty smile curled on the lip of Porthos, and a negative sign was the reply of Aramis. You do not understand me, gentlemen, said D'Artagnan, throwing up his head, the sharp and bold lines of which were at the moment gilded by a bright ray of the sun. I ask to be excused in case I should not be able to discharge my debt to all three, for Monsieur Athos has the right to kill me first, which must abate your valor in your own estimation, Monsieur Porthos, and render yours almost null, Monsieur Aramis. And now, gentlemen, I repeat, excuse me, but on that account only, and on guard. At these words, with the most gallant air possible, D'Artagnan drew his sword. The blood had mounted to the head of D'Artagnan, and at the moment he would have drawn his sword against all the musketeers in the kingdom as willingly as he now did against Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. It was 1:15 midday. The sun was in its zenith, and the spot chosen for the scene of the duel was exposed to its full ardor. It is very hot, said Athos, drawing his sword in its turn. And yet I cannot take off my doublet, for I just now felt my wound begin to bleed again, and I should not like to annoy Monsieur with the sight of the blood which he has not drawn from me himself. That is true, Monsieur, replied D'Artagnan, and whether drawn by myself or another, I assure you I shall always view with regret the blood of so brave a gentleman. I will therefore fight in my doublet, like yourself. Come, enough of such compliments, cried Porthos. Remember, we are waiting for our turns. Speak for yourself when you are inclined to utter such incongruities, interrupted Aramis. For my part, I think what they say is very well said, and quite worthy of two gentlemen. When you please, Monsieur, said Athos, putting himself on guard. I waited your orders, said D'Artagnan, crossing swords. But scarcely had the two rapiers clashed, when a company of the guards of his eminence, commanded by Monsieur de Josec, turned the corner of the convent. The cardinal's guards, cried Aramis and Porthos at the same time. Sheath your swords, gentlemen, sheath your swords. But it was too late. The two combatants had been seen in a position which left no doubt of their intentions. Halloo, cried Josec, advancing toward them and making a sign to his men to do so likewise. Halloo, Musketeers! Fighting here, are you? And the edicts, what has become of them? You are very generous, gentlemen of the guards, said Athos, full of rancor, for Josec was one of the aggressors of the preceding day. If we were to see you fighting, I can assure you that we would make no effort to prevent you. Leave us alone then, and you will enjoy a little amusement without cost to yourselves. Gentlemen, said Jussac, it is with great regret that I pronounce the thing impossible. Duty before everything. Sheath then, if you please, and follow us. Monsieur, said Aramis, parodying Jussac, it would afford us great pleasure to obey your polite invitation if it depended upon ourselves, but unfortunately the thing is impossible. Monsieur de Treville has forbidden it. Pass on your way then. It is the best thing to do. This raillery exasperated Jussac. We will charge upon you then, said he, if you disobey. There are 5 of them, said Athos, half aloud, and we are but 3. We shall be beaten again, and must die on the spot. For on my part, I declare, I will never again appear before the captain as a conquered man. Athos, Porthos, and Aramis instantly drew near one another, while Jussac drew up his soldiers. This short interval was sufficient to determine D'Artagnan on the part he was to take. It was one of those events which decide the life of a man. It was the choice between the king and the cardinal. The choice made, it must be persisted in. To fight, that was to disobey the law. That was to risk his head. That was to make at one blow an enemy of a minister more powerful than the king himself. All this the young man perceived, and yet, to his praise we speak it, he did not hesitate a second. Turning toward Athos and his friends, Gentlemen, said he, allow me to correct your words if you please. You said you were but 3, but it appears to me we are 4. But you are not one of us, said Porthos. That's true, replied D'Artagnan. I have not the uniform, but I have the spirit. That is a line to know. I have not the uniform, but I have the spirit. My heart is that of a musketeer. I feel it, monsieur, and that impels me on. Withdraw, young man, cried Jussac, who doubtless by his gestures and the expression of his countenance had guessed D'Artagnan's design. You may retire. We consent to that. Save your skin. Be gone quickly. D'Artagnan did not budge. Decidedly, you are a brave fellow, said Athos. Come, choose your part, replied Jussac. Well, said Porthos to Aramis, we must do something. Monsieur is full of generosity, said Athos. But all 3 reflected upon the youth of D'Artagnan and dreaded his inexperience. We should only be 3, of whom is wounded with addition of a boy, resumed Athos, and yet it would not be the less said that we were 4 men. Yes, but to yield, said Porthos. That is difficult, replied Athos. D'Artagnan comprehended their irresolution. Try me, gentlemen, said he, and I swear to you by my honor that I will not go hence if we are conquered. What is your name, my brave fellow? Said Athos. D'Artagnan, monsieur. Well then, Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan, forward, cried Athos. Come, gentlemen, have you decided? Cried Jussac for the 3rd time. It is done, gentlemen, said Athos. And what is your choice? Asked Jussac. We are about to have the honor of charging you, replied Aramis, lifting his hat with one hand and drawing his sword with the other. See the picture? Ah, you resist, do you? Cried Jussac. Does that astonish you? And the 9 combatants rushed upon each other with a fury which, however, did not exclude a certain degree of method. Athos fixed upon a certain Jussac, a favorite of the cardinals. Porthos had Bicarat, and Aramis found himself opposed to 2 adversaries. As to D'Artagnan, he found himself assailing Jussac himself. The heart of the young Gascon beat as if it would burst through his side. Not from fear, he had not the shade of it, but with emulation. He fought like a furious tiger, turning 10 times round his adversary, and changing his ground and his guard 20 times. Jussac was, as was then said, a fine blade, and had had much practice. Nevertheless, it required all his skill to defend himself against an adversary who, active and energetic, departed every instant from received rules, attacking him on all sides at once, and yet parrying like a man who had the greatest respect for his own epidermis. This contest at length exhausted Jussac's patience. Furious at being held in check by one whom he had considered a boy, he became warm and began to make mistakes. D'Artagnan, who though wanting in practice had a sound theory, redoubled his agility. Jussac, anxious to put an end to this, springing forward, aimed a terrible thrust at his adversary, but the latter parried it, and while Jussac was recovering himself, glided like a serpent beneath his blade and passed his sword through his body. Jussac fell like a dead mass. D'Artagnan then cast an anxious and rapid glance over the field of battle. Aramis had killed one of his adversaries, but the other pressed him warmly. Nevertheless, Aramis was in a good situation and able to defend himself. Bicaret and Porthos had just made counter hits. Porthos had received a thrust through his arm, and Bicaret one through his thigh, but neither of these two wounds was serious, and they only fought more earnestly. Athos, wounded anew by Jussac, became evidently paler, but did not give way a foot. He only changed his sword hand and fought with his left hand. According to the laws of dueling at that period, D'Artagnan was at liberty to assist whom he pleased. While he was endeavoring to find out which of his companions stood in greatest need, he caught a glance from Athos. The glance was of sublime eloquence. Athos would have died rather than appeal for help, but he could look, and with that look ask assistance. D'Artagnan interpreted it. With a terrible bound, he sprang to the side of Jussac, crying, "To me, Monsieur Guardsman, I will slay you." Jussac turned. It was time for Athos, whose great courage alone supported him, sank upon his knee. "Do not kill him, young man, I beg of you," cried he to D'Artagnan. "I have an old affair to settle with him when I am cured and sound again. Disarm him only. Make sure of his sword. That's it. Very well done." The exclamation was drawn from Athos by seeing the sword of Jussac fly 20 paces from him. D'Artagnan and Jussac sprang forward at the same instant, the one to recover, the other to obtain the sword. But D'Artagnan, being the more active, reached it first and placed his foot upon it. Jussac immediately ran to the guardsman whom Aramis killed, seized his rapier, and returned toward D'Artagnan. But on his way he met Athos, who during his relief which D'Artagnan had procured him had recovered his breath, and who, for fear that D'Artagnan would kill his enemy, wished to resume the fight. D'Artagnan perceived that it would be disobliging Athos not to leave him alone, and in a few minutes Jussac fell. At the same instant Aramis placed his sword point on the breast of his fallen enemy and forced him to ask for mercy. There only then remained Porthos and Bicaret. Porthos made 1,000 flourishes, asking Bicaret what o'clock it could be, and offering him his compliments upon his brother's having just obtained a company in the regiment of Navarre. But just as he might, he gained nothing. Nevertheless, it was necessary to finish. The watch might come up and take all the combatants, wounded or not, royalist or cardinalist. Bravery is always respected, even in an enemy. The Musketeers saluted Bicaret with their swords. Page 68. And returned them to their sheaths. D'Artagnan did the same. Then, assisted by Bicaret, the only one left standing, he bore Jussac, Jussac, and one of Aramis's adversaries, who was only wounded, under the porch of the convent. They then rang the bell, and carrying away 4 swords out of 5, they took their road, intoxicated with joy, toward the hotel of Monsieur de Treville. They walked arm in arm, occupying the whole width of the street and taking in every musketeer they met, so that in the end it became a triumphal march. The heart of D'Artagnan swam in delirium. He marched between Athos and Porthos, pressing them tenderly. "If I am not yet a musketeer," said he to his new friends as he passed through the gateway of Monsieur de Treville's hotel, "at least I have entered upon my apprenticeship, haven't I?" Now, take out a clean sheet of paper and answer the Think It Through questions numbers 1 through 9. See you in class.